Hi viewers, welcome back to Silent Case, the place where forgotten files, cold trails, and hidden truths finally speak. Every story here is more than mystery. It's a voice from the past, waiting to be heard. Today's story takes us back to Texas, 1997, when five cousins vanished from a quiet lakeside lodge, and what the FBI uncovered decades later left the entire nation stunned. This is the case of the five who never came home. Subscribe and watch the full story now. On a storm-heavy night in August 1997, five cousins checked into a remote Texas hunting lodge for a weekend reunion. By sunrise, the lodge was empty. Their shoes by the door, their food half served, the front door unlocked. They were never seen again, until a discovery in 2024 rewrote everything the FBI thought it knew about that night. On August 9, 1997, the road to Cedar Hollow Lodge disappeared into the woods like a secret the pines didn't want to share. It was late evening, and thunder was building somewhere far off, a slow, rolling kind of sound that felt more like a warning than weather. The five Holt cousins had been coming here since childhood. Eli, 23, quiet and protective. Clara, the youngest at 19, always with a camera. Mason, the loud one. Ruth, careful and bookish. And Daniel, the oldest, steady as stone. That summer, they were meeting for a weekend reunion before life carried them to different corners of the country. The caretaker of the lodge, an old ranch hand named Gene Wilder, said they checked in just before sunset. He remembered Mason joking about the size of the spiders and Clara asking if there was still a phone line that worked in storms. Gene told them not to worry. The power only flickers when the wind wants attention. By 8:30 p.m., rain began to fall in wide, heavy drops. The cousins unpacked, started a fire, and laid out board games on the old oak table near the window. A cassette player clicked softly in the background. Fleetwood Mac, one of Eli's old tapes. Gene left the property at 9:15, locking the gate behind him. They were laughing, he told deputies later. Didn't seem like anything bad could find them up there. At 10:47 p.m., a neighbor across the lake reported seeing the lodge lights flicker 3 times, then vanish altogether. The storm was at its peak. When lightning struck the tree line, it cast the house in flashes of white and blue, empty windows staring into the rain. No one saw the cousins again after that. The next morning, Gene returned to bring them breakfast. The front door was open. The fire had burned down to ash. 5 pairs of shoes were lined up neatly by the entrance, still damp from the night before. On the table, breakfast plates had been set, half-buttered toast, a jar of jam, a knife mid-swipe. The cassette player was on the floor, tape pulled out like tangled ribbon. Outside, both cars were still parked. The grass was slick but undisturbed, no footprints leading to or from the vehicles. The only marks were in the mud behind the cabin, long drag lines that ended abruptly at the edge of the trees. When Sheriff Calvin Briggs arrived, he described the scene as frozen in time. The beds were unmade, jackets still hanging on chairs, Ruth's diary open on the porch railing. The last line read, "The air feels strange tonight, like the forest is listening." Detectives combed the area. They found no blood, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. But something about the silence felt staged, deliberate. Even the storm damage seemed minimal around the lodge, as if the weather itself had avoided that patch of land. That afternoon, Briggs ordered a team of deputies to search the woods. By sunset, they had covered a 3-mile radius. Nothing. Dogs caught a scent by the creek, but it faded before reaching the bridge. The water ran clear, shallow, and quiet. Locals began whispering. Some said the cousins got lost trying to find the old quarry beyond the ridge. Others swore the lodge was built over an abandoned well and the earth had finally opened. But what unsettled investigators most were the lights several campers claimed to have seen the night before. Pale, moving orbs drifting through the trees near the lodge around midnight. The sheriff dismissed it as lightning reflection. But in his later report, he added one private note, scribbled in the margin, The pattern of the lights doesn't match the storm. That line was never meant for public record. For 2 days, volunteers searched. Planes flew overhead. Thermal cameras scanned the woods. But there was no trace of 5 young lives that had been so vividly present hours before. When the sun set on August 12th, Sheriff Briggs stood on the porch of Cedar Hollow Lodge, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. He looked at the empty doorway, at the stillness inside, and said to no one in particular, "It looks like they just walked out of time." He didn't know it then, but those words would be replayed 27 years later, in the FBI briefing room, when the case was reopened. Because something was found in 2024 that would make those drag lines behind the lodge mean something entirely different. The morning after the disappearance, the forest around Cedar Hollow looked calm. Too calm, like it was pretending nothing had happened. Mist still clung to the trees, and the air smelled of wet soil and cedar smoke. Sheriff Calvin Briggs arrived with 6 deputies, 2 search dogs, and more questions than anyone could answer. They started with the basics: tire marks, footprints, any sign that 5 people had left the property on foot. But the ground told no story. The only impressions near the porch were those long drag lines behind the cabin. Faint now, washed thin by the night's rain. Briggs crouched down, tracing one with his hand. It stopped halfway into the brush, like whatever made it had simply lifted off the earth. By noon, volunteers had joined the search. Locals from Fort Stockton, old ranchers, a few students from the nearby college who'd heard about the case on the morning radio. They formed a grid and began sweeping through the woods. The sound of their voices calling out the cousins' names echoed through the hills. No one answered back. At 2 p.m., a deputy found a small patch of disturbed soil near the creek. Shallow, circular, no more than a foot deep inside, were 3 objects: a plastic lighter, a rusted fork, and what looked like a piece of fabric. But the fabric wasn't clothing. It was a curtain scrap, torn from the lodge's window, folded carefully, almost deliberately. When Gene Wilder, the caretaker, saw it, his hands shook. "That window was intact when I left," he said. "They didn't need to tear it." Briggs ordered the area cordoned off. A forensic team collected samples, but rain kept falling, thin, relentless, washing away whatever small truths the ground might have held. By evening, the dogs were tired and the deputies were silent. The following morning, helicopters scanned the area. From above, the forest looked endless, each treetop identical, every path dissolving into shadow. The pilot reported no sign of movement, no unusual clearings, no heat signatures beyond small animal clusters. Back at the station, Briggs reviewed maps spread across his desk, drawing circles that meant nothing. 1 mile radius, 2 miles, 5. The circles got bigger, but the answers didn't. On the 3rd day, they drained the creek for a mile stretch, believing the cousins might have slipped in during the storm. Nothing surfaced. No clothing, no bones, not even a shoe. What surfaced instead were questions about the timeline. A woman named Mary Ellen Tate, who lived across the lake, came forward. She swore she saw lights moving in the woods around midnight. Not lightning, but steady beams like flashlights. "They weren't 5, she said quietly. "Looked more like 6 or 7 shapes, all moving together." That statement would later be buried in the supplemental report, never confirmed or denied. By the end of the week, the Texas Rangers joined the investigation. They treated the area as a possible abduction site, but found no tracks from vehicles, no tire ruts along the access road. It was as if the entire forest had swallowed its own evidence. When the sun went down on the 5th day, Sheriff Briggs gathered his team by the lodge steps. Their faces were grey with exhaustion, clothes soaked with rain and mud. "We'll keep going," he said, but his voice sounded like someone trying to convince himself. That night, he stood alone inside the lodge. The floorboards creaked softly beneath his boots. The air was cold, still carrying the faint scent of burnt wood. On the mantel lay Ruth's diary, now sealed in a plastic bag for evidence. Briggs flipped it open to the last page again. The ink had run from the rain, but one line was still visible. "If something happens, promise they'll look for us." He closed the diary, stared at the empty room, and whispered, "We're looking, Ruth. But you left us nothing to find." Outside, the rain eased into a fine drizzle. Somewhere deep in the woods, a single owl called, long, distant, and lonely. By the next morning, the search was scaled back. The official report would read, "No evidence of foul play discovered, investigation ongoing." But behind that sentence, Briggs added one more note to his private journal. The same notebook agents would discover 27 years later when the case was reopened. The forest hides more than bodies. It hides guilt. And that guilt was about to resurface 2 decades later when a young FBI analyst noticed something strange in the old evidence box. By the end of August 1997, the case of the 5 missing Holt cousins had drained every available resource in Pecos County. The search parties dwindled, the reporters packed up, and the once buzzing police station returned to its familiar hum of silence. Files that had lived on top of desks for weeks began to slide quietly into drawers. Sheriff Calvin Briggs sat alone in his office most nights, the soft glow of the desk lamp falling over a mountain of paperwork that said everything and nothing at once. For every lead, there was a dead end. For every witness, a contradiction. He went through the timeline again, every detail of the weekend at Cedar Hollow arrival, 7:18 p.m. Storm, 10:30. Lights out, 10:47. And then, nothing. No calls, no sightings, no trace. It wasn't just a mystery. It was a void. When the FBI arrived in late September, Briggs thought maybe things would turn around. Agent Paul Granger, a man with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too many cold cases, took over the investigation. He ordered the soil near the creek retested, requested weather satellite imaging, even brought in a behavioral analyst. But after 3 weeks, Granger's report read only one line that mattered: insufficient evidence to indicate criminal activity. That sentence sealed the fate of the Holt case. By November, the official search was suspended. The Cedar Hollow Lodge was padlocked and left to the forest. The evidence boxes were labeled, indexed, and stored in the basement of the Pecos County Sheriff's Office. 7 boxes in total, marked with black ink, Holt, CH97. The community tried to move on, but time didn't dull the unease. Every holiday season, the Holt family left a single light burning on their porch, facing west toward the road that led into the woods. 5 chairs stayed empty at every reunion. Clara's mother wrote letters to the sheriff every month, the same question phrased 100 different ways. Have they found anything new? Briggs always answered honestly, "No, ma'am. Not yet." Years passed. The woods grew thicker. The road to Cedar Hollow cracked and filled with moss. Teenagers dared each other to drive up there at night, claiming they could still hear laughter echoing near the lake when the wind blew right. The locals began to call it the Lodge that forgot time. In 2008, the sheriff retired. Before leaving, he packed the case files neatly and placed his own notebook inside the top box, the one that held Ruth's diary and the torn curtain fabric. On the first page, he wrote, "I don't think they ran. I think someone helped them disappear." That note was never logged officially. For the next 15 years, the Holt case lived in silence. A headline in archives, a file on microfilm, a ghost of a story that most people stopped asking about. But in 2023, something strange happened. During a heat wave, a wildfire swept through the old Cedar Hollow area. The flames scorched acres of forest but left the original lodge foundation nearly untouched. When firefighters cleared the debris, one of them, a young recruit named Aidan Cross, found something half buried in the ash. It was a cassette tape, its label melted but still legible under the soot. It read, August 9th, 1997, CH. The tape was turned over to local authorities, logged and forgotten. Another oddity in a case too old for anyone to care about. It sat in the same evidence box that would, a year later, be digitized by a new FBI analyst. And when she pressed play, she would hear something that would shatter 27 years of silence. Faint voices, the sound of rain, and one line that froze the entire room. Please don't turn off the light. In 2024, the Holt case was little more than a digital footprint, a scanned collection of fading reports and photos sitting in the FBI's cold case archive. Thousands of unsolved disappearances were being reviewed under a new federal program called Project Reclaim, designed to digitize decades of forgotten evidence. That's how special analyst Leah Marston found it. Leah was 32, methodical, quiet, the kind of agent who preferred silence to small talk. She'd joined the Bureau's cold case division not out of ambition, but curiosity. Her father had been a state trooper who vanished from her life when she was 12. She understood what it meant when someone just stopped being there. The Holt case wasn't assigned to her directly. It simply appeared in her queue. Case file number TX 972415. She opened the folder expecting the usual. Missing persons, rural jurisdiction, no suspects, no resolution. But something about the photographs pulled her in 5 faces, captured mid-laughter on a Polaroid from 1997. They looked young, carefree, unaware that this image would become the last trace of their existence. The digitization process required Leah to cross-check physical evidence. So she went to the basement archives of the Pecos County Sheriff's Office, where the air was thick with dust and old paper box after box sat stacked like forgotten coffins. She found the one she was looking for, Holt, CH97. When she opened it, the smell of cedar and mildew filled the room. Inside were 7 evidence bags, soil samples, a burnt lighter, a diary, and the melted cassette tape marked a UG9 1997 CH. Leah requested permission to reprocess the audio using modern forensic software. The request was approved in less than an hour. That night, she sat alone in the lab, headphones on, fingers hovering over the play button. The old tape crackled to life, rain, static, the faint hum of a power line. Then, through the noise, voices, muffled, panicked, overlapping one male voice, possibly Eli Holt, whispered, "Clara, keep the light on." Another voice, a woman's, replied, "Someone's outside." Then came a sound like a door slamming, and silence. Leah replayed it 4 times. On the 5th playback, she caught something she hadn't before, a distorted click like the shutter of a camera right before the silence hit. She checked the timestamp on the audio. It matched 4:19 a.m., hours after the cousins were last seen alive. That didn't fit the timeline. Digging deeper, Leah found an untagged Polaroid in the same evidence box, one that wasn't listed in any of the official photo logs. The picture was faint, blurred by age, but it clearly showed 5 silhouettes near a lake, standing close together. The timestamp on the back read August 10th, 1997, 4:32 a.m. Her pulse quickened. That was nearly 6 hours after investigators believed they vanished. Leah leaned back in her chair, staring at the image under the cold blue light of her monitor. If the timestamp was genuine, it meant the cousins were still alive after the power outage, possibly until dawn. She submitted both the tape and the Polaroid for forensic reanalysis. The audio expert confirmed it. The ambient sound on the recording didn't match the known storm data from that night. The rainfall pattern came from after the storm had passed, which meant the recording and the photo were taken later, somewhere else. Leah wrote her preliminary report that night. It was cautious, procedural, but her closing line stood out. Evidence suggests the group may have been relocated post-disappearance. That sentence would change everything. 2 weeks later, an internal memo reached her inbox, flagged confidential. It contained one line from a local construction report. During excavation near the old Cedar Hollow property, workers unearthed a rusted chain bracelet with engraved initials C.H. C.H. Clara Holt. Leah stared at the screen, her heart pounding. After 27 years, the forest had finally given something back. But what no one knew yet was that the bracelet hadn't been buried for decades. The soil on it was fresh, disturbed less than 6 months ago. The bracelet arrived at the FBI evidence lab sealed in a clear plastic bag tagged "Recovered near Cedar Hollow excavation site, June 2024. At first glance, it was unremarkable. A rusted silver chain with an oval nameplate, the letters CH faintly visible under years of corrosion. But Leah Master knew better than to trust first glances. She requested immediate analysis. Soil composition, residue, trace materials, everything. The initial findings came back 2 days later. The report was short, but it turned her stomach. The mineral content of the soil matched a newly disturbed area, not one untouched since 1997. Whoever placed the bracelet there wanted it to be found. That meant someone was watching the case. Leah reopened her laptop and revisited the old Cedar Hollow topography files. The lodge had been demolished in 2003 after a lightning strike set fire to its remains. What stood there now was an unfinished vacation property. A shell of concrete and scaffolding surrounded by dense woods. The excavation crew had been working just 20 yards from the original lodge foundation when they unearthed the bracelet. She booked a flight to Texas that night. When Leah arrived in Pecos County, the landscape felt frozen in time. The pine trees still leaned inward as if guarding secrets. The air still smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Sheriff Dalton, the same man who'd handled the original 1997 investigation, met her at the site. He was older now, his hair gone silver, his voice lower, cautious. He handed her a folder. "That bracelet wasn't buried deep," he said. "Barely 6 inches under the surface. Fresh soil packed tight, like someone dug with their hands." Leah nodded. "When did your crew find it?" 2 weeks ago. But here's the part that doesn't sit right. That section of land wasn't on the blueprints for this build. The ground was disturbed before the construction even started. She crouched near the dig site, tracing her fingers over the soft earth. The soil was loose, dark, smelling faintly metallic. Something about it felt wrong. Too intentional, too staged. Later, back at the county archives, she requested the original map of the Holt family property. The boundaries showed something strange. A small clearing behind the main lodge that hadn't appeared on any recent blueprints. It was labelled Private Access, Dock Path. The photo from the recovered Polaroid suddenly made sense. The 5 silhouettes near a lake. Leah returned to the site the next morning with a field technician. They followed the old trail until it opened to a shallow lakeshore, overgrown and silent. She scanned the area with a thermal drone. The feed came back mostly cold. Except for one small patch near the waterline that reflected differently, they started digging. 6 inches down, the shovel struck metal. Leah's breath caught. The technician brushed away mud until a small object emerged. A half-buried camera lens, fractured but intact. It looked decades old, the brand long discontinued. She sealed it in a bag, heart pounding. If that lens belonged to the camera from the Holt Lodge, it might connect to the mysterious click sound captured on the 1997 audio tape back at the lab. The techs cleaned it carefully. Inside the shattered lens casing, they discovered something microscopic. A single fragment of modern glass fiber, manufactured no earlier than 2022. The evidence was clear. The bracelet and the lens had been planted recently. Someone with access to the original materials wanted to make it look like a genuine recovery. But who? And why now? Leah returned to her hotel that night and opened her laptop again. She logged into the Bureau's secure database to check access records. 3 weeks before the bracelet surfaced, someone had quietly downloaded the full Holt case file from the cold case archive under a false clearance code. Whoever it was, they had read everything Leah had, before she even reopened the investigation. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A voice, distorted, calm, almost rehearsed, spoke only one line. "You're looking in the wrong place, Agent Marston. They never left the water." The call ended. No traceable ID. Leah sat frozen, staring out the window at the dark Texas tree line. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance under the moonlight. For the first time since she'd reopened the Holt case, she felt something more than curiosity. She felt watched. Leah didn't sleep that night. The voice from the call replayed in her mind again and again. Calm, almost rehearsed. They never left the water. By morning, she'd already requested a full trace through Bureau Tech Services. Nothing. The call had bounced through 5 encrypted relays, one of which was traced back to a radio tower long decommissioned near Cedar Hollow. She drove there at dawn. The tower stood in the middle of a clearing, skeletal and rusted, surrounded by overgrown brush. Static hummed faintly from the wind slicing through its steel ribs. Leah's flashlight cut through the morning fog as she approached the old service shed nearby. Padlock rusted, hinges gone. Inside, she found nothing but a single wooden chair, a broken radio transmitter, and dust thick enough to write in. On the wall, someone had scrawled 3 letters with a black marker. C.H. She stepped back, pulse pounding. The same initials engraved on the bracelet. The radio unit looked ancient, but a small power light flickered weakly when she brushed her fingers over the switch. It shouldn't have worked. The grid had been dead here for years. Leah leaned closer and twisted the frequency dial. A wave of static filled the air, followed by faint, disjointed sounds, like voices beneath water. Then, a whisper. Leah. Her body went rigid. She shut the radio off and stepped outside, the fog pressing in like a living thing. Her rational mind told her it was an interference glitch, old signals looping from nearby frequencies. But something deeper, colder, said otherwise. Back at the field office, she uploaded the radio's audio output for analysis. Spectrogram results revealed something shocking. The sound wasn't random interference. It carried a partial match to one of the missing cousins' voices from a 1996 home video the FBI had on file. Specifically, Caleb Holt. The analysts couldn't explain how a voice from nearly 3 decades earlier appeared embedded within static. But the timestamp on the recording, captured by Leah's equipment, showed a clear date. June 14th, 2024. The night before the bracelet was found, someone had deliberately transmitted that signal. Leah played the file again, headphones on, isolating frequencies manually. Under the faint hum, she heard more. Snippets of breathing, what might have been wind, and then a distinct click. That same sharp sound she remembered from the 1997 audio logs recovered from the Lodge security system. She froze the waveform and compared both samples. They were identical. Whoever transmitted that signal had access to original evidence, or was recreating it. Her phone buzzed with a new message, an encrypted email with no sender address. The subject line simply read, "Do you hear them now?" Attached was a single image, the same Polaroid she'd seen in the archives, only now digitally enhanced the 5 cousins at the lakeshore. But this version showed something she hadn't noticed before. In the reflection of the water behind them was a 6th silhouette, blurred, standing just beyond the dock. Leah zoomed in. The figure's outline was faint, tall, and appeared to be holding something metallic, possibly a camera. She felt the blood drain from her face. The timestamp at the bottom of the photo had been altered too. The original read, August 17th, 1997, 6:48 p.m. This one read, August 17th, 1997, 6:52 p.m. 4 minutes later. The exact window when the last known sounds were recorded before the cousins vanished. The message ended with one final line beneath the image. The lake remembers everything. Leah closed her laptop slowly. Whoever was doing this wasn't just taunting the investigation. They were reconstructing it piece by piece, as if trying to relive the disappearance. Outside, thunder rolled low across the horizon, echoing through the trees. The storm was moving in again, The same pattern as that night in 1997. Leah stood at the window, watching rain start to fall over the waterline beyond the lodge ruins. In the static hum of the wind, she thought she heard it again, that faint, deliberate click. And this time, it was closer. The storm that rolled in that night washed out half the county roads, but Leah didn't wait. The enhanced Polaroid image, the faint reflection of a sixth figure, had been haunting her every second since she'd seen it. The height, the stance, the faint outline of the shoulders. She'd seen that posture before. In the old Holt family photos from the case archive, there was one man who matched it perfectly. Deputy Roy Henson, the first officer to respond to the Holt Lodge disappearance back in 1997. He'd retired quietly in 2009, moved out to a small ranch north of Pecos County, and hadn't spoken publicly about the case in over 2 decades. But according to his pension record, he was still alive. Leah left before dawn. The drive took 3 hours through winding back roads and misted pine woods. Henson's property sat on a low ridge surrounded by cattle fencing and rusted trucks. The mailbox still read, R. Henson, Deputy Rhett. She parked at the gate and called out as she approached the porch. No answer. The screen door hung open slightly, creaking in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper and machine oil. Then she saw them. Boxes stacked along the walls, labelled Cedar Hollow, 1997, in black ink. Her pulse quickened. She picked up the first file and flipped it open. Dozens of photos spilled out, all taken during the original search operation. But mixed among the official shots were several Polaroids she'd never seen before. Interior rooms of the lodge, a cracked window, a flashlight beam cutting across a wall. In one frame, a child's handprint smeared against a door frame. And then, the last photo stopped her cold. A group shot of the local police team during the 1997 investigation. In the back row, barely visible, stood Henson. And beside him, a man in the same jacket and posture as the sixth figure in the lakeshore reflection. Leah turned the photo over. On the back, written faintly in pencil, were the words, "He told me not to look." Footsteps creaked behind her. She turned sharply, and there he was. Roy Henson, older, frailer, his face marked by deep lines and long years of silence. His right hand trembled as he gripped the doorframe. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Leah held up the photo. "Deputy Henson, I'm reopening the Holt case. I believe someone's been manipulating evidence. This picture, who's the man beside you?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes drifted toward the window, the storm light flickering across his face. "You think I don't hear them too?" he whispered. "Every night that sound. The click, the water." "Hear what?" Leah pressed. Henson looked back at her, a mix of fear and guilt behind his eyes. "I buried that evidence because it wasn't supposed to exist. We were told to close the file, told it was over." "Who told you?" He hesitated. "A man from Austin. Said he was bureau liaison. Showed credentials, but they weren't like yours." Leah's breath caught. "Describe him." "Tall, clean cut. Always wore a uniform, not ours. Said his name was Hale." That name struck something in her memory. Hale. She'd seen it. In the digital clearance log from the cold case archive. The false ID used to access the Holt files 3 weeks before she reopened the case had been authorized under the alias R. Hale. Leah stepped closer. "Deputy, where did you last see him?" Henson's hand shook harder now. "By the lake," he said. "He said the files needed to disappear. Same night we found that camera lens." Lightning flashed outside. The lights flickered and a low static hum filled the room. Faint, but growing louder. Henson's radio scanner, unplugged for years, sputtered to life on the shelf. Through the crackle, Leah heard it again, the same whisper from the tower recording. They never left the water. Henson's face went pale. He stumbled back, clutching his chest. "He's still here," he murmured. "He never left." Leah reached for him, but before she could speak, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room. The static died. Only rain filled the silence. When the lights returned, the radio was off, and the boxes marked Cedar Hollow/1997 were gone, every single one. Leah drove back to the field office in silence, rain sweeping across the windshield like static. The name Hale looped in her mind, an alias that didn't belong anywhere in the Bureau's database, yet tied directly to the clearance code that accessed the Holt files. Whoever he was, he had authority once, or had stolen it. But what unsettled her most wasn't the name. It was the missing boxes. Someone had entered that house in complete darkness, removed every document, and left no trace. The old deputy's terrified eyes replayed in her memory. He never left? At the office, she requested an immediate database trace on R. Hale. The system rejected the query. Restricted, Omega-level access. That classification didn't exist in standard FBI tiers. It was used only for closed government operations, those that had been scrubbed from public record. Leah's clearance wasn't enough, so she used a backdoor route, one she'd learned years ago in cyber investigations. She cross-linked the alias with photo evidence metadata from the original Holt Lodge archives. After several dead ends, one result appeared: a forgotten folder inside an offline evidence drive, dated August 23, 1997. The file name, IMG_002A. Second exposure. Her heart kicked. She opened it. The image loaded slowly, glitching from age and compression. It showed the same lakeshore as the first Polaroid. Same angle, same lighting. But now, only 4 cousins stood at the water's edge. The 5th, Caleb Holt, was missing from the frame, and behind them, the 6th figure had moved closer. The outline was clearer this time. A man in uniform, shoulder patch faintly visible under magnification. Leah enhanced the image, isolating the insignia. The symbol wasn't standard law enforcement issue. It resembled an outdated government crest, a circle enclosing a triangle with a single vertical line through it. Below it, one word barely visible under the film grain: Unit H. She froze. That term appeared in an old classified case she'd studied years ago. Operation Helius, a covert intelligence project tied to surveillance experiments in remote sites during the late 90s. Cedar Hollow was one of their listed coordinates. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was an operation. She checked the photo's metadata again. A faint digital tag added decades after the image was captured. Restored. R. Hale. Archive. A24. Whoever Hale was, he hadn't just accessed the Holt files. He'd personally altered them. Leah leaned back, staring at the glowing monitor. She zoomed into the waterline reflection, and there, under the rippled distortion, she noticed something chilling, a reflection of herself. The reflection wasn't possible. This image had been taken in 1997, but the reflection showed a blurred silhouette. Same haircut, same frame, standing exactly where she had been the previous night near the shore. Her phone buzzed. Another encrypted message appeared, same sender as before. Subject: You found it. Attached, a new image, a grainy still from a security camera inside her own field office. It showed her at the computer, staring at the photo she'd just opened. Timestamp: 15 seconds ago. Leah's breath caught. She turned slowly, scanning the corners of her office. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. A red LED blinked on one of the smoke detectors, but it wasn't supposed to. Someone was watching her in real time. She ripped the panel down and found a micro camera recently installed. On its side was a sticker label: Property of Department of Defense, Helius Division. Her pulse thundered. She dumped the camera into an evidence bag, locked the office, and moved fast to her car. If the Helius project was real, and still active, then this case wasn't just about 5 missing cousins. It was about whatever the government had been doing at Cedar Hollow before they vanished. As she drove away, her phone buzzed again. One final text. Stop looking at the past, Agent Marston. It's already looking back. The message vanished before she could screenshot it, and from somewhere deep within the static of her car radio, the faint click echoed again, followed by the whisper of a boy's voice. Help us. The whisper lingered long after Leah shut off the radio. Help us. It wasn't a recording glitch. The voice had cadence, emotion, breath, human. By the time she reached the Cedar Hollow site again, dawn had begun to break through the storm clouds. Mist coiled above the lake, pale and still, like breath frozen mid-air. She parked near the old lodge foundation, a concrete skeleton half swallowed by weeds and moss. The property was supposed to be under lockdown after the recent discoveries, but the padlock on the site fence hung open. Someone had been here. Again. Leah moved cautiously through the ruins, flashlight slicing through beams of fog. The air was unnervingly silent. Beneath the collapsed structure, faint scorch marks lined the floor, remnants of the 2003 fire. But something else caught her eye. A patch of newer cement, smoother than the rest, square-shaped and roughly 4 feet wide. She knelt down, tapped the surface. Hollow. Her pulse quickened. She radioed for backup, but static answered. The same low hum she'd heard before. She started scraping at the edges with her utility knife. The cement cracked easily, revealing a recessed panel beneath. Metal, not concrete. Etched faintly across the surface were the words, Unit H, Access Vault 02. The latch had no keyhole, only a fingerprint scanner, long corroded. Leah hesitated, then pressed her hand against it. The mechanism sparked weakly and unlocked with a mechanical click. The floor panel lifted to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Her flashlight beam trembled against the walls as she descended. The steps led down nearly 20 feet before opening into a small underground chamber, cold, metallic, lined with dust-caked servers and rusted equipment. At the center of the room sat a single workstation, still humming faintly with power from an old backup generator. Wires snaked across the floor like veins. A faded Helius insignia was painted across one wall, the same symbol from the second photo. Leah brushed her fingers over the desk. A thick layer of dust clung to the surface, except for one small circle. Clean, recently touched. Someone had been here recently. A single monitor flickered to life when she moved the mouse. A login screen appeared, the header reading, Project Helius, Subject Log Archive. Below, a prompt, Access File, Halt, Entry, 01-05YN. Leah hesitated. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed Y. The screen glitched, static rippling across the display, then stabilized. A series of grainy video thumbnails appeared. The first was time-stamped August 14th, 1997, 3 days before the disappearance. She opened it. The footage showed the 5 cousins sitting in a small room. Not the lodge, but a concrete space lit by a single overhead bulb. They looked confused, frightened. Caleb Holt glanced toward the camera as if waiting for instruction. In the background, a man's voice spoke calmly. Just stay still, kids. This won't take long. Then came the sound, the sharp, distinct click. The screen flickered and all 5 children vanished mid-frame. Leah's hand flew to her mouth. She replayed the footage. Same thing. They didn't walk off screen. They simply blinked out, like the frame had been erased mid-capture. The second file opened automatically. It showed a group of men in uniform entering the room. One of them, tall, clean-cut, turned toward the camera briefly. Leah froze the frame and enhanced it. It was Hale. He was younger, but unmistakable. The same angular jawline, same insignia on his sleeve. He turned toward the camera and spoke. Helius phase complete containment successful. Then the video cut to static. Leah stared at the screen, trembling. The Helius project hadn't been about surveillance. It was an experiment. And the Holt cousins were the subjects. Before she could pull external copies, the monitor flickered again. The cursor moving on its own, a new message appeared. You shouldn't have opened that. The speakers emitted a low hiss. Then, through the static, came faint voices. Not one, but several, overlapping, echoing through the room like ghosts caught between frequencies. Find us. It's still here. He's watching. Leah yanked the power cord from the wall. The sound stopped instantly. She stood in the dark, heart pounding, trying to catch her breath. Then she heard it, faint scraping above her. Footsteps. Someone walking across the concrete floor above the vault. She drew her sidearm and killed her flashlight. The footsteps paused. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the pitch-black hallway behind her, came a whisper. Male, close enough to stir the air near her ear. Phase 2 begins tonight. Leah spun, but the corridor was empty. Leah didn't remember climbing the stairs. Only the burning in her lungs when she reached the surface. The air outside felt thinner, heavier somehow, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The sky had turned the color of bruised ash, and the wind through the pines whispered a steady hum that sounded almost electrical. She steadied her hands and called dispatch static again. Every frequency was dead. When she turned back toward her car, she saw something that stopped her cold. Footprints, fresh, leading away from the lodge ruins. Too large to be her own, too heavy to belong to anyone who had fled in a hurry. They trailed toward the tree line, vanishing into the dense wall of pines. She followed. The forest floor was slick with pine needles and old rain, the smell of iron thick in the air. The footprints deepened as she moved farther in, like the person had been carrying something heavy. After a few minutes, she saw light ahead, faint, amber, pulsing in slow intervals. It wasn't fire, it was electrical. The clearing opened around a small cabin, half collapsed and overtaken by vines. A hand-painted sign still hung crookedly by the doorframe. Property of the Helius field station. Restricted. Leah's heart began to race. This wasn't on any map she'd reviewed. Inside, the air was stale and metallic. Shelves lined the walls, filled with canisters labelled with numbers. H97-04, H97-05, and so on. Old equipment sat in corners beneath sheets of dust. At the centre, a rusted generator hummed weakly, powering a single ceiling bulb that swung with each gust through the cracked window. Leah began photographing everything. The canisters, the faded Helius paperwork scattered across a desk. Then she saw a photo pinned to the wall. It was the Holt cousins. The same image she'd seen 100 times, except this one had a sixth figure standing behind them. A man in a dark uniform, face obscured by glare. In black marker, someone had written across the bottom, Phase 2, viable subjects identified. Leah's throat went dry. The desk drawer stuck when she tried to open it, but after a few tugs, it slid loose. Inside was a folder labelled Operation, Reclamation. Pages of notes, typed and annotated by hand. One paragraph was highlighted in red. If containment breach occurs, activate Phase 2 undersite Pine Base. Maintain extraction readiness for surviving subjects. She froze on the words, Site Pine Base. It wasn't the cabin. It was something deeper. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of a generator underground. She followed the sound toward a large pine that had split near the base. The soil beneath was disturbed, freshly dug. Beneath the roots, a narrow metal hatch gleamed under her flashlight. The hinges screeched as she lifted it. A ladder descended into the dark. The smell hit her first, sterile, chemical, mixed with the damp rot of earth. The tunnel walls were concrete, lined with fiber cables leading deeper underground. Leah moved slowly, weapon drawn, counting her breaths. At the end of the tunnel, she found a reinforced door marked with fading stencil paint, Pine Base / sub-level access. It was ajar. She pushed it open and stepped into a chamber that mirrored the Helius vault. Only this one wasn't abandoned. The lights were on. A long row of glass pods stretched along both sides of the corridor. Inside each, murky fluid shimmered under cold light. Something moved within one of them, faintly, like a body twitching in sleep. Leah stumbled backward, her pulse roaring in her ears. She aimed her flashlight into one of the pods and gasped. It was Caleb Holt. He looked older, late 30s maybe, but his face was unmistakable. His eyes were closed, tubes running from his mouth to a control panel beside the tank. A digital monitor read, Subject age 97-04, stable. Leah pressed a shaking hand against the glass. Caleb! A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Someone was there. Agent Hale, she called out. I know you're involved in this. I saw the footage. The shadow stopped. Then a calm, low voice echoed back through the chamber. You were never supposed to find Pine Base, Detective. Her flashlight flickered once. Then everything went dark. In the pitch black, machinery began to hum louder, as if awakening from sleep. Then, from the darkness, a single sentence came, familiar, deliberate, and chilling. Phase 2 begins now.